The sun was beginning its descent, painting the sky over our quiet suburban neighborhood in hues of orange and purple, a familiar, comforting sight that usually signaled the end of a peaceful day. Today, however, the beauty of the sunset was lost on me. I stood on my porch, the worn wood beneath my feet a constant reminder of the decades I had spent here, raising my son David with my late husband Arthur Thompson. Arthur Sr. had poured his heart and soul into this house. Every renovation, every garden planted, a testament to our shared life. Now, the house felt like a stage for my own undoing. The day had started with an unsettling quiet, an absence of David's usual call, an absence that had morphed into a gnawing anxiety as the hours passed. Then the phone call came, David's voice crackling with a forced cheerfulness that immediately set my teeth on edge. "Mom," he'd begun, his tone a little too loud, a little too bright. "Guess what? Sarah and I just got back from that incredible trip to Hawaii we were planning. It was amazing, Mom, truly life-changing." He paused, expecting, I suppose, my immediate delight. But before I could respond, before I could even process the casual mention of a vacation I had not been invited to, nor even known was happening, he delivered the blow that shattered my world. "And you know how things have been tight financially for us? Dad, well, Sarah, she's just so generous. She really made it happen. She handled everything. She sold your house to cover the costs. You know, making sure everything was taken care of. So, you have one day to pack. We'll have movers come tomorrow. He sold my house, my home, to pay for a vacation." The words registered slowly, each syllable a hammer blow against the edifice of my trust. My home, the place where Arthur Sr. and I had raised David, where we had celebrated milestones and weathered storms. The place I had intended to live out my remaining years had been sold. Sold for a vacation, and I had one day to pack. The phone slipped from my grasp, clattering onto the porch floor. The world tilted, the familiar houses across the street blurring into an unrecognizable landscape. My son, my own flesh and blood, had orchestrated this. He had taken my home, my sanctuary, and traded it for a fleeting escape. The sheer audacity, the utter lack of empathy, the chilling practicality of it all left me speechless, frozen on my own porch. The setting sun mocking me with its beauty. The memory of David's childhood, a tapestry woven with my efforts to provide stability and opportunity, a conscious attempt to compensate for Eleanor's absence, now felt like a poignant counterpoint to the present reality. Arthur Sr. and I had always believed in nurturing our children, in ensuring they had every advantage. After Eleanor's passing 15 years ago, my focus had narrowed, centering almost entirely on David's well-being and success. I had poured not only my time and expertise, but also the very inheritance Eleanor had left us, a nest egg meant for my own comfort in my later years, into David's ventures. Each financial request, from the down payment on his first apartment to the capital for his fledgling business, had been met with my willing support. "Dad, this next investment is the one," he would say, his eyes alight with a familiar boyish conviction, and I, ever the doting father, would oblige, drawing from my own savings, deferring my own retirement plans. I had bought him his first car, paid for his postgraduate studies, and even facilitated the purchase of his current apartment, a testament to Sarah's refined taste and his own burgeoning success. Sarah's entry into his life had been a noticeable shift. Her ambition was palpable, her desire for financial security evident in every word, every subtle manipulation aimed at David's ear. I recalled instances where Sarah had suggested I look into certain investment opportunities, often with exceptionally high returns, promised opportunities I had later discovered were either overly risky or non-existent. I had dismissed these concerns, attributing them to Sarah's eagerness to integrate into the family and David's youthful optimism. I had always believed in second chances, in the inherent goodness of my son, and in the power of a stable family unit. Eleanor, my late wife, had always been the more cautious one, her gentle warnings often lost in my own optimistic nature. "Theodore," she would say, her brow furrowed with concern, "David is a good boy. But Sarah, she has a way of making things seem brighter than they are. Be careful with your heart and your wallet." Her words, meant as gentle counsel, now echoed with a prophetic resonance. A lament for the years of unquestioning faith I had placed in my son and his chosen partner. I remembered filling out transfer forms, signing over funds, each act a brick in the foundation of the life I believed David was building, a life I thought would one day reflect the sacrifices I had made. I had believed in the inherent goodness of my son, in the strength of our family bonds, in the security of a legacy built on years of hard work and devotion. That belief, I now understood with crushing clarity, was the most significant sacrifice of all, a foundation built on sand. Each dollar transferred represented not just a financial transaction, but a piece of my trust, a fragment of my hopes for his future. a belief in the inherent decency that should bind a family. The wedding, meant to be the pinnacle of this shared vision, had become its undoing. The stark reality was that my love, my financial support, my very presence in his life, had been calculated not for genuine affection but for strategic gain. This realization was a bitter, crushing weight. The sacrifices I had made, the opportunities I had deferred, all for a son who now seemed to view me as a financial obligation rather than a father. The casualness with which David had delivered the news, the chillingly practical tone he adopted as he outlined my immediate eviction, "You have 1 day to pack," had shattered the remaining vestiges of my denial. It was a betrayal that went beyond financial loss. It was a complete obliteration of my parental standing, a ruthless severing of the very bond I had nurtured and protected for decades. I replayed his words in my mind. "I sold your house to pay for a vacation for me and my wife." The sheer gall, the utter lack of remorse, the reduction of my home, my life's tangible history, to a mere funding source for a frivolous vacation, struck me with a force that left me breathless. I saw the pattern clearly now. Sarah's insistent suggestions about finances, her subtle criticisms of my lifestyle, her constant emphasis on their financial needs, all culminating in this ultimate act of dispossession. My willingness to help, my desire to see my son succeed, had been interpreted not as love, but as an endless resource to be plundered. My silence, my accommodation of their demands had enabled this. But something snapped in that moment. A breaking point reached not through anger, but through a quiet, resolute clarity. I realized that my continued accommodation would only validate their actions, that my past generosity had created a dangerous precedent. My reply would not be one of tears or pleading, but of truth delivered with a calm certainty that would cut through their carefully constructed facade. The phone felt heavy in my hand, but my grip was firm. The game had irrevocably changed. Their attempt to redefine my role, to diminish my value, would be met not with a plea for understanding, but with a statement of fact that would dismantle their entire narrative. This was not about whether I liked the vacation or their financial management. It was about asserting the reality of their betrayal and the profound disrespect they had shown. My reply when it came was quiet, but carried the weight of years of unspoken sacrifices and dawning realizations. "David," I began, my voice steady.com, a tone that surprised even me. "I am glad you and Sarah enjoyed your vacation. It sounds luxurious. However, before we discuss packing or moving, there are a few things that need to be addressed regarding the sale of my house." The shift in the conversation, the immediate pivot from their indulgence to my dispossession, seemed to catch David off guard. He stammered, "What are you talking about, Mom? The house? It's just a building." Clara's voice, sharp and cutting, interjected, "Theodore, David is right. You need to pack. We have obligations, and frankly, we cannot afford to keep supporting you. This is for the best." The implication hung heavy in the air. My dependence was a burden they were no longer willing to carry. I continued, my voice gaining a measured strength. "A building, David. This is where your mother lived for 40 years. This is where your father and I built our life. This is where you grew up. And it was my house, purchased with my inheritance from Eleanor, after your father passed. You sold it, without my knowledge, to fund your vacation, and you give me 1 day to pack?" The accusation, stated as simple fact, hung in the air. David's response was a mumbled "I had to. Mom, Sarah," she said it was the only way. The blame shifting, the immediate deflection to Sarah, confirmed my suspicions about her influence. Clara's voice cut in again, sharp and brittle. "Do not speak to David like that. We are protecting our future. You are just being emotional and ungrateful. You need to leave." The accusation of being emotional, of not being practical, was their final attempt to dismiss my reality. But my mind was clear. My reply was not one of tears or pleading, but of truth, delivered with a calm certainty that would cut through their carefully constructed facade. "My emotions, Sarah, are entirely justified given the circumstances. And my pragmatism tells me that my son has been thoroughly misled or is complicit in a grave injustice. As for needing to pack, I will pack, yes, but not as you dictate. I will pack what is rightfully mine, and then I will see Mr. Davies. He is waiting for my call." The mention of Mr. Davies, my lawyer, seemed to visibly rattle them, a crack in their confident facade. The immediate aftermath of that phone call was a strange mix of trepidation and exhilaration. David's evasiveness and Sarah's manipulative accusations had been met not with my usual placid acceptance, but with a quiet assertion of truth and a firm refusal to be railroaded. They had underestimated my capacity to see through their carefully constructed facade, mistaking my years of quiet sacrifice for inherent weakness. My reply, spoken with a calm I had not realized I possessed, had not only changed David's tone but had irrevocably altered the dynamic between us. They had tried to frame my life's work as a burden, my home as a disposable asset, and my emotional reaction as irrationality, by stating the truth plainly that my home was my sanctuary, built on a lifetime of effort, and that their actions were driven by greed, not necessity. I had refused to play their game. The silence that followed my words, the immediate defensiveness in David's voice, and Sarah's attempt to pathologize my reaction as emotional instability were all confirmations that I had struck a nerve. They had expected tears, perhaps pleading, or at least a confused acquiescence. Instead, they received a quiet assertion of reality and a clear indication that I would not be easily dismissed. This was my first refusal, not a physical rejection, but a powerful verbal boundary set. It was the moment I stopped being a passive victim in their narrative and began to reclaim my own voice. The victory was small in the grand scheme of things, but monumental for my own awakening. It was the first step in dismantling the illusion they had so carefully crafted, the first refusal to be defined by their terms. I knew this wouldn't magically solve all our problems, but it had established a crucial truth. I was no longer willing to be manipulated or devalued. The power dynamic had shifted, however subtly. The quiet assertion of my perspective had indeed changed their tone completely, replacing their calculated arrogance with a flicker of unease and defensiveness. It was a small victory, but it was mine, a reclaiming of my own narrative and my own worth. This moment marked the end of my acquiescence and the beginning of my conscious effort to confront their actions and protect myself. The refusal was not an act of aggression, but an act of self-preservation, a declaration that my life, my home, and my dignity held value, regardless of their attempts to strip them away. The sterile and personal environment of Mr. Davies' law office offered a stark contrast to the emotional chaos churning within me. The air was cool, smelling faintly of leather-bound books and polished wood. A world away from the suffocating atmosphere of my own home, now occupied by my son and his wife, or the unsettling scent of their callous disregard that lingered in my memory. Mr. Davies, a man whose professional demeanor was tempered by a quiet understanding of human failings, listened to my account with a focused intensity. My voice, initially trembling as I recounted David's words, had steadied as I presented the facts. His eviction notice, the unilateral sale of my house, the chilling motive of a vacation. He examined the details with meticulous care, his brow furrowing as he reviewed the documents I had brought, the deed to my home, old tax records, and the eviction notice itself. His questions were precise, cutting through the fog of my emotional distress with the cold logic of legal procedure. "Theodore," he began, his voice grave, "your son's actions are not only morally reprehensible but potentially illegal, depending on the legal transfer of ownership. You mentioned a power of attorney document. That is key. We need to determine its validity, when it was executed, and if any undue influence was present. We also need to investigate the sale itself, who purchased the property, and if they were aware of the circumstances of your eviction." His inquiries were not about my emotional devastation, but about factual evidence, about the cold, hard data that could form the basis of a legal case. He explained the complexities of contesting a property sale, the procedures for proving undue influence or fraud, and the importance of gathering every piece of evidence that supported my claim to ownership and the illegitimacy of the sale. "We need to act swiftly," he advised, his gaze steady. "There are deadlines for contesting such transactions. Your priority now is to provide me with every scrap of documentation you have regarding the house, your finances, and your interactions with David and Sarah." His counsel, though devoid of personal sympathy, was profoundly grounding. It offered a path, a structured approach to dealing with the overwhelming devastation, a way to channel my confusion and anger into tangible action. He confirmed my suspicion that Sarah was likely the mastermind behind this scheme, using David as a pawn, and that proving this would be crucial for our case. He was my first ally outside of the immediate, though tainted family circle, a professional force of order in the face of utter chaos, a stark reminder that justice, though often slow, was a tangible possibility, and that understanding the legal intricacies was the first step towards reclaiming my rights. He advised me to secure copies of all original property documents, any correspondence with David and Sarah regarding finances or the house, and to prepare for a potentially lengthy legal battle. The days that followed my consultation with Mr. Davies were a blur of legal paperwork and a gnawing, pervasive emptiness. The eviction had left me temporarily displaced, staying in a modest hotel room that felt impersonal and cold, a stark contrast to the warmth and familiarity of the home I had built. The silence was broken only by the phantom echo of David's words, Sarah's cruel dismissal, a constant, agonizing reminder of the profound betrayal. I found myself replaying countless moments of my relationship with David, searching for subtle signs, for hints of this underlying dynamic of entitlement and manipulation that had unfolded so insidiously. It was during one of my solitary walks, a need to escape the suffocating atmosphere of my own thoughts and the weight of this newfound awareness, that I found myself at Mrs. Gable's doorstep. She was a neighbor, a woman of quiet observation and unexpected warmth, who had known Eleanor well, and had always offered a kind word and a listening ear. Seeing my visible distress, she approached, not with intrusive pity, but with a gentle, knowing presence. "Theodore," she began softly, her eyes reflecting a deep well of compassion that seemed to see straight through my carefully constructed facade. "You seem troubled. Is everything all right?" Her words, simple and direct, cut through the emotional haze. She did not pry, but she listened as I hesitantly at first. Then, with a flood of pent-up emotion, recounted the events of Mother's Day. The call from David, Sarah's manipulative words, and my subsequent eviction. She shared her own experiences. A sister who had, over years, systematically drained her parents' savings through elaborate scams. A nephew who had vanished after a series of fraudulent schemes. "You are not alone in this, Theodore," she said, her hand resting gently on mine, a simple touch that conveyed immense comfort. "It is a special kind of pain, when the ones you love most seem to take advantage of your kindness. But you are strong." Arthur Thompson knew that. He saw that strength in you, even when you could not see it yourself. Mrs. Gable became my mentor, not just in navigating the practicalities of my changed circumstances, but in the emotional journey of reclaiming my boundaries. She shared stories of her own struggles with entitled family members, how she had learned to set firm limits, to prioritize her own well-being, and to recognize the difference between genuine generosity and exploitation. She introduced me to her circle of friends, women who had faced their own trials of difficult family dynamics, financial strain and emotional manipulation, but had emerged with resilience, grace, and a shared understanding. They became my unexpected alliance, a community forged in shared experience, offering a lifeline, a reminder that I was not alone and that recovery was possible. Her advice about establishing clear boundaries, about communicating my needs directly, and about the importance of self-respect was invaluable. She also subtly reinforced the idea that my actions, my firm reply, were not an act of rejection, but an act of self-preservation. This affirmation was crucial in shifting my perspective from victimhood to empowerment. I began to focus on small, achievable goals, meticulously organizing my financial records, securing my remaining assets with new legal safeguards, and establishing new routines that prioritized my own well-being and my fight for respect within my family. The initial shock had given way to a period of profound grief and isolation, but as I began to take these steps, a sense of agency started to emerge. A realization that even in the face of devastating loss, I had the capacity to heal and to fight. The stark realization that my son, influenced perhaps by his wife, was capable of such calculated manipulation had left me profoundly unsettled, questioning the very foundation of our relationship, the narrative of our filial bond. The house, once filled with Arthur Thompson's comforting presence and the echoes of our shared life, now felt like a repository of my own perceived failings. A place where my trust had been so grievously misplaced, the silence was broken only by the phantom echo of Arthur Jr.'s evasive tone, Clara's overly solicitous voice, all now tinged with suspicion. I found myself replaying countless moments from my relationship with Arthur Jr., searching for subtle signs, for hints of this underlying dynamic of dependency and manipulation that had unfolded so insidiously. It was during one of my solitary walks, a need to escape the suffocating atmosphere of my own thoughts and the weight of this newfound awareness, that I found myself reflecting deeply on the nature of unconditional love versus enabling behavior. I had always believed in supporting my son, in providing for him. But had I crossed a line, blurring the boundaries between parental support and enabling his dependence? Eleanor's letters, my late wife, often spoke of balance, of ensuring that love did not become a crutch. Her gentle reminders about maintaining my own life, my own pursuits, now resonated with a profound truth. I realized that my focus on Arthur Jr.'s needs had, perhaps, inadvertently diminished my own sense of self-worth, making me vulnerable to their manipulations. This period of introspection was painful, forcing me to confront my own passivity and my reluctance to set boundaries. But it was also crucial for my awakening. I began to understand that true love for my son did not mean sacrificing my own well-being, or enabling his irresponsibility. It meant guiding him towards his own independence, even if it meant confronting him with difficult truths. The isolation I felt was profound. The loss of the idealized relationship with my son, a gaping wound that ached with a constant, dull throb. But the burgeoning sense of self-reliance, the quiet strength unearthed by adversity, began to offer a fragile yet persistent glimmer of hope. Mrs. Gable, in particular, became an invaluable mentor. She shared stories of her own struggles with entitled family members, how she had learned to set firm limits, to prioritize her own well-being, and to recognize the difference between genuine generosity and exploitation. She introduced me to her circle of friends, women who had faced similar trials of difficult family dynamics, financial strain, and emotional manipulation, but had emerged with resilience, grace, and a shared understanding. They became my unexpected alliance, a community forged in shared experience, offering a lifeline, a reminder that I was not alone and that recovery was possible. Her advice about establishing clear boundaries, about communicating my needs directly, and about the importance of self-respect was invaluable. She also subtly reinforced the idea that my actions, my firm reply, were not an act of rejection but an act of self-preservation. This affirmation was crucial in shifting my perspective from victimhood to empowerment. I began to focus on small, achievable goals, meticulously organizing my financial records, securing my remaining assets with new legal safeguards, and establishing new routines that prioritized my own well-being and my fight for respect within my family. The Mother's Day phone call had been a watershed moment, a stark confrontation that irrevocably altered the landscape of my relationship with my son, David, and his wife, Sarah. The initial shock and hurt quickly hardened into a resolve to understand the full extent of their manipulative behavior. Sarah's influence over David was becoming increasingly apparent. Her subtle criticisms of my life choices, her veiled suggestions about my financial management, and her constant insistence on controlling the narrative of our family's interactions painted a clear picture of her intentions. Mr. Davies, my lawyer, became my confidant and strategist. I presented him with the details of the phone call, my own notes documenting their financial requests over the years, and the unsettling pattern of their communication, all of which painted a disturbing picture of financial dependence and emotional exploitation. Mr. Davies meticulously reviewed everything, identifying Sarah's manipulative tactics, gaslighting, financial control disguised as care, and the isolation of the protagonist from external support. He began gathering evidence of Sarah's own financial history, any record of debt, failed ventures, or extravagant spending that might explain her desperate need for my assets. He also advised me to document every interaction, every financial transfer, and every instance of subtle pressure or control, building a case not just for financial exploitation, but for undue influence and emotional abuse. The rising tension was a constant hum beneath the surface of my daily life, a reminder that this was an ongoing battle, a fight for my autonomy and my future. Detective Miller, when consulted about the potential for fraud or coercion related to any financial transactions that might have occurred, confirmed that such patterns, while difficult to prosecute without more concrete evidence of malice, could certainly be indicative of financial abuse. She advised me to gather any evidence that demonstrated Sarah's direct involvement in managing David's finances and her controlling influence over him. The potential for legal action, while daunting, also provided a framework for my own resistance. Mr. Davies initiated legal proceedings to freeze any assets that might be at risk, though recovering the full extent of what had been dissipated would be a long and difficult process. The stakes were incredibly high, not just for my financial future, but for my very identity as a parent who had been so grievously deceived. Armed with the details of Clara's manipulative tactics, my meticulous financial records, and a clearer understanding of the psychological warfare being waged against me, I met with Mr. Davies to formulate our defense. He examined the evidence with a grave expression. Recognizing the pattern of financial exploitation and emotional manipulation, Theodore, he stated, his voice serious, his gaze meeting mine with professional solemnity. This situation suggests a clear pattern of undue influence and financial control. Sarah is attempting to position herself as the financial authority, likely to gain greater control over David's assets and, by extension, your resources. We need to document every instance of this behavior and prepare for the possibility of needing to establish firmer boundaries, legally if necessary. Our strategy began to solidify around this damning evidence. We would use the documentation of financial transfers, any communication records highlighting Clara's control, and crucially, witness testimonies from those who had observed the dynamics between Arthur Jr., Clara, and myself. Mr. Davies advised me to gather affidavits from my closest friends and Mrs. Gable, who could attest to my mental competence, my clear decision-making abilities, and the nature of my relationship with Arthur Jr. and Clara prior to the inheritance and subsequent pressure. He also suggested a psychiatric evaluation to officially confirm my mental and emotional stability, a preemptive measure against Clara's potential claims of my incompetence should the situation escalate to legal proceedings. Meanwhile, Mrs. Gable and her bridge club became my steadfast support system. They helped me navigate the emotional toll, offering invaluable counsel and encouraging me to focus on my fight for justice. They reminded me of my own resilience, of the strength Arthur Sr. had always seen in me, and encouraged me to focus on reclaiming my life. I started attending therapy, a suggestion from Mrs. Gable, to process the complex emotions of grief for the son I thought I knew, the simmering anger at the betrayal, and the profound sense of loss that permeated my days. The process was painful, often emotionally taxing, but undeniably cathartic, helping me to reframe the narrative from one of helpless victimhood to one of resilient self-preservation. I began to meticulously document every aspect of my life that had been impacted, not just the financial devastation, but the emotional toll, the social isolation, and the psychological impact of such a profound breach of trust. This preparation wasn't just for a legal battle, it was for my own psychological recovery, a methodical process of reclaiming my narrative and rebuilding my sense of self-worth, piece by painstaking piece. The determination was clear, resonating within me like a battle cry. The truth had to be uncovered, and I was ready to fight. Mr. Davies also initiated legal proceedings to freeze any assets that might be at risk. Though recovering the full extent of what had been dissipated would be a long and difficult process, he stressed the importance of presenting Clara's recent actions, the veiled insults, the controlling behavior, the attempts to isolate me as further evidence of her manipulative intent and disregard for any genuine familial connection. He also advised me to prepare my own testimony, focusing on the facts, the timeline, and the emotional impact of their actions, ensuring a clear and coherent presentation of my case. The courtroom was a stark, impersonal space, its austere architecture and hushed atmosphere a world away from the suffocating tension of my recent family interactions. The proceedings felt surreal, a legal battle against my own son and daughter-in-law, individuals whose actions had caused such profound pain. Arthur Jr. and Clara sat across the aisle, their faces impassive, their eyes devoid of any recognition of the father who had sacrificed so much for them, now flanked by their formidable legal team led by Mr. Sterling, a man renowned for his aggressive courtroom tactics. Sterling, with practiced efficiency, presented their defense, subtly portraying me as an elderly, overly trusting parent, easily manipulated by my own declining years, and perhaps influenced by external parties, rather than the capable individual who had been systematically exploited. He highlighted my temporary displacement and financial distress, attempting to frame it as evidence of my inability to manage affairs, rather than the direct consequence of their fraud. Arthur Jr.'s testimony was a rehearsed performance of bewilderment at my supposed paranoia and my attempts to disrupt their family's finances. Clara, in her testimony, adopted the guise of a dutiful daughter-in-law who had merely assisted her husband and father-in-law with managing finances, her words dripping with feigned concern and a subtle accusation of my own failings. Then, it was my turn to take the stand. Facing Arthur Jr. and Clara across the courtroom, their faces impassive, their eyes devoid of any recognition of the father who had raised them, I felt a surge of unwavering resolve, a quiet strength that had been forged in the fires of betrayal. Mr. Davies guided me through my testimony, allowing me to speak directly to the court to lay bare the truth of the past year, not with anger, but with the quiet, unwavering conviction of truth. I recounted the Mother's Day phone call, the subsequent financial drain, the isolation, and the sheer audacity of their actions. I presented the journal entries detailing Clara's manipulative plans and Arthur Jr.'s complicity. Detective Miller testified about the difficulty in tracing the funds and the evidence gathered pointing to a deliberate scheme. Mrs. Gable provided a powerful character reference for me, highlighting my stability, my resilience, and my unwavering devotion to my family, painting a picture of a loving parent, not a manipulated or mentally unfit individual. My own testimony was the emotional core of the trial. I spoke of my life, of Eleanor's wisdom, and of the stark contrast between the loving family I cherished and the manipulative dynamic that had taken root. My support for Arthur Jr. was born of love and paternal obligation, I declared, my voice ringing with conviction, but it became a tool for manipulation, a means to exploit my generosity. I will not be defined by their actions or their definitions of my worth. The cross-examination by Mr. Sterling was brutal, an attempt to portray my grief as delusion, my pursuit of financial stability as a desperate, irrational act. But I held firm, my answers clear, my emotions raw but honest, articulating the truth of my experience without wavering. He tried to twist my efforts to protect myself financially into evidence of erratic behavior, but I calmly explained the necessity of securing my remaining assets after discovering the extent of their fraud. The turning point came when Mr. Davies presented the detailed financial records, highlighting the disproportionate sums transferred to Arthur Jr. and Clara versus any genuine needs, and presented testimonies from friends who had observed Clara's controlling behavior and Arthur Jr.'s passive compliance. The judge, Justice Sterling, a woman known for her impartiality, and her unwavering dedication to upholding justice delivered her verdict after a tense period of deliberation that felt like an eternity. She acknowledged the overwhelming evidence presented. My meticulous financial records, the testimonies of Mrs. Gable and my friends, and the clear pattern of Arthur Jr.'s and Clara's financial dependence and manipulative behavior. She highlighted the emotional and financial toll it had taken on me. The evidence strongly suggests a pattern of financial exploitation and emotional manipulation, Justice Sterling stated, her voice firm and resonant. The defendant's actions appear motivated by a sense of entitlement rather than genuine need or familial respect. While the court cannot compel emotional reconciliation, it can uphold financial fairness and accountability. Therefore, while direct recovery of all dissipated funds may be challenging, the court strongly advises Arthur Jr. and Clara to seek independent financial and personal counseling. Furthermore, for the protection of Mr. Theodore Vance, the court orders a formal cease and desist from all financial requests and manipulative communications directed towards him. Any future interactions must be through legal counsel, and Mr. Vance is advised to take all necessary steps to protect his remaining assets and personal well-being. A collective sigh of relief rippled through the room, a palpable release of tension. I had one. It wasn't just about regaining the money, though. That was a crucial component of justice. It was about vindication. It was about proving that truth, however buried, would ultimately prevail. Arthur Jr. and Clara, their faces ashen, were escorted from the courtroom by bail. Their calculated scheme, so meticulously planned, had unraveled, exposed by the unwavering commitment to truth and the collective weight of evidence and testimony. Justice in this instance had been served, not with vengeance, but with the quiet, profound affirmation of what was right and lawful. The verdict marked the end of one harrowing chapter and the beginning of another, the chapter of my own rebuilding, and perhaps a reckoning for my son and his wife. The days following the court's verdict were suffused with a profound sense of quiet victory and a deep restorative relief that seeped into my very bones. The legal proceedings had been exhausting, emotionally draining, and a stark reminder of the depths to which familial bonds could be corrupted by greed and entitlement. Yet emerging from it, I felt a clarity I had not experienced in years. The initial shock of Arthur Jr.'s and Clara's betrayal, the subsequent struggle to reclaim my financial independence and my emotional equilibrium, had stripped away the illusions I had clung to for so long. My focus now shifted from the past and its painful revelations to the future and its unclaimed possibilities. I made the difficult decision to sell my personal residence, the place that held too many memories of both joy and profound sorrow, a symbol of a life built on trust that had been so ruthlessly broken. The proceeds, carefully managed with Mr. Davies's guidance, allowed me to solidify my financial independence and to make strategic yet decisive moves. The first was to reassert my boundaries with Arthur Jr. and Clara, not with vengeance, but with the unwavering firmness of someone who had learned their lesson. I stopped the monthly allowance, redirecting those funds towards my own well-being and future. I began to re-engage with the world, not as a victim, but as a survivor. My interactions marked by a newfound clarity and a quiet strength. I took Mr. Davies' advice and began attending therapy, a process that helped me to disentangle my own sense of worth from my children's perceived needs. Mrs. Gable and her friends became my steadfast anchors, their shared wisdom and practical advice invaluable. They encouraged me to focus on my own interests, reminding me that my life had value beyond my role as a provider. I started pursuing my long-neglected passions, taking art classes, a creative outlet I had abandoned years ago, and joining a local gardening club, activities that nourished my mind and spirit. The quiet moments spent in my new, more manageable apartment were no longer shadowed by dread or anxiety, but filled with a profound sense of peace and deep contentment. I found solace in the simple act of choosing my own path, of pursuing my own interests, of living a life unburdened by the weight of my sons and daughter-in-law's manipulations. The house was gone, but in its place I had found something far more valuable, a renewed sense of self, a testament to my resilience, and a spirit unburdened by the weight of their betrayal. One crisp autumn afternoon, as I sat on my porch swing at my new, more manageable apartment, watching the city lights twinkle below, a view so different from the familiar quiet of my old yard, a profound sense of peace settled over me, deep and unwavering. The apartment was quiet, filled with the gentle hum of a life finally lived on my own terms. The sun warmed my face, and the faint scent of possibility seemed to fill the air. I had faced my deepest fears, confronted betrayal at its most devastating, and emerged not just intact, but stronger, wiser, and more fully myself than I had ever believed possible. Arthur Jr.'s and Clara's actions, born of greed and a profound lack of character, had inadvertently freed me from a life lived in service of their desires, allowing me to finally live a life for myself. The inheritance that had promised so much had instead brought so much pain. But paradoxically, it had led me to the greatest inheritance of all. The profound and unshakable truth of my own self-worth and the unshakable freedom to live my life, finally, for myself. I had learned that love cannot be demanded or bought. It must be earned and freely given, and that true security lies not in the possessions or relationships one accumulates, but in the inner strength and resilience one cultivates. My name was not vanished from my life, nor was my sense of purpose. They were mine in every sense of the word, a testament to a battle fought and won, a testament to the enduring strength of the human spirit, and a promise of a future finally lived with authenticity and joy. My name is Theodore Vance. I am 71 years old, and after a lifetime of giving, of sacrifice, and of profound betrayal, I have finally learned the invaluable lesson of self-preservation and the unyielding power of fighting for what is rightfully yours. The journey from the shock of discovering my son's and daughter-in-law's manipulation to this quiet liberation had been arduous, marked by deep pain, righteous anger, and a fear I once thought would consume me. But through it all, I discovered a strength I never knew I possessed. Arthur Sr.'s legacy wasn't just in the financial security he provided, but in the lessons of integrity and resilience. He embodied lessons that guided me back to myself. Arthur Jr. and Clara's actions, born of greed and a profound lack of character, had inadvertently freed me from a life lived in service of their desires, allowing me to finally live a life for myself. If my story resonated with you, if you saw a reflection of your own struggles or triumphs, or if it simply moved you, I would be deeply grateful for your support. Your engagement helps me continue to share these narratives of resilience and hope. Please consider leaving a comment below. I am always eager to hear your thoughts. What would you do in my place? How would you reclaim your life after such a devastating betrayal? Your perspectives are invaluable to me. For more stories of courage, the overcoming of adversity, and the quiet triumph of reclaiming one's life and dignity, please like this video and subscribe to my channel. There are many other stories waiting to be told, each one a testament to the enduring power of truth and self-discovery. With heartfelt greetings, and until next time,